Welcome to the Paul Chandler Show, everyone. I'm your host, Paul Chandler. In tonight's episode, we're going to be continuing our op report dissection series, and tonight we'll be looking at the respiratory system. So after we come back, you'll be looking at my computer screen, and I'll be highlighting certain text as I'm talking about it. So that way I'll be elaborating how we'll be looking at the op report and coding it from scratch, as in the real world, the fill-in-the-blank environment. So that way when we come back, hold on tight, and we'll be learning how to dissect an op report for the respiratory system. We'll be right back. Now, in this case, we have a post-op diagnosis of recurrent pleural effusion, stage 4 lung cancer. So there we have two different diagnosis codes we need to look at, and the procedure performed: right video-assisted thoracoscopy, lysis of adhesions, talic pleurodesis. So just like always, I'm going to look up the diagnosis codes first. And in the post-op diagnosis, since we have a comma between them, that helps distinguish that we have two different diagnosis codes going on. So I'm going to go with the first code first. And remember that as far as the sequencing goes, whenever we have diagnosis codes that are listed in order left to right with a comma between them, we list them in priority order as well. So in this case, recurrent pleural effusion would be the first diagnosis code. And then the stage 4 lung cancer would be the second diagnosis code. So I'm going to work on now the recurrent pleural effusion. And that would also go if we have the diagnosis codes listed in order, like bullet points, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. So in this case, if it said 1, recurrent pleural effusion, then on the next line, 2, stage 4 lung cancer, same way how to do it, just sometimes doctors like to list it different ways. But here though, with the first diagnosis code, again, we have recurrent pleural effusion. So we want to start with the most generic description of the word first, then get more specific after that. So out of recurrent pleural effusion, the most generic term is the word effusion. And notice though too, it does not work all the time, but I would say majority, as in more than 50% of the time. When we're trying to find the most generic terms and get more specific as we work on the drop downs for diagnosis coding, we tend to start at the far right and then work our way left. For example, recurrent pleural effusion, the first word that we'd actually look up is the word effusion, which also matches since that is the word on the farthest right. So in my AAPC 2018 ICD-10 book, I'm looking up the word effusion as the first word, which would take me to page 158. So I'm looking up the word effusion, and I have that word, so I'm going to cross out that word since I've already used it, or do a strike through it. And then my other two words that I have are recurrent and the word pleural to work with. So I'm going to actually, in this case, pleural would be the next most generic phrase. So that's the next word I'm going to look up. But even if I did not know that pleural was the next generic word we're going to use, as far as the drop downs for effusion, I have pleura that I can use. However, I do not have recurrent. So I do see effusion, drop down to pleura, which takes me to the top right of page 158, about 1.5 inches down from the top of the right column. And there we get pleura. So I have pleura, pleurisy, pleurititic, pleural pericardial, J90. And then I have some following drop downs. So I'm going to do a strike through just the word pleura, since I got that word. And the only other word that I can use is the word recurrent. Now, since I do not have any of my drop downs after pleura, the word recurrent available, I'm going to have to go with the generic term, effusion, drop down pleura, and I'm going to have to use the default code J90. However, though, remember we have the rule, never code from the front of the book. Always go to the back of the book to verify. But not only that, though, I still have the word recurrent available to choose from if I can use it. So now I'm looking back at page 711 and see if I can use the word recurrent or not, or seeing if I have any different options I can choose. So I'll go back to J90, code J90 on page 711, and I have pleural effusion, not elsewhere classified, and I have some other phrases we can use as well. Acystic pleurisy, pleural effusion NOS, not otherwise specified, and pleurisy with effusion, exudative or serious. I do have an excludes list there, but none of the excludes list has the word recurrent there. And in this case, I'm going to choose code J90 as my first listed diagnosis code. I'm going to make that green here to highlight it out a little bit more. So J90 would be my first listed diagnosis code. And in this case, I'd actually be using the pleural effusion NOS, not otherwise specified, because I have the phrase recurrent in my documentation. However, I know specifically that it's the recurrent type of pleural effusion, and while there's no other code available, that word recurrent would classify for the NOS designation. So I'm going to go ahead and do a cross out on the word recurrent because I applied the cross out to NOS in pleural effusion for J90. That gives us the first diagnosis code. Second diagnosis code then we have is stage 4 lung cancer. So since this is a cancer, then if we look up the word cancer in the front of our ICD-10 book, just in case if we are not remembering that for cancer, meaning neoplasm, neoplasm table, if I go to cancer, then that takes me to page 82 in the front index, left column, about midway through. The drop downs, nowhere does it say anything about the lung. I have bile duct, blood, breast, and so forth. However, though, by cancer, it says, see also neoplasm, comma, by site, comma, malignant. So then I have to go to the neoplasm table. And the neoplasm table, neoplasm table, beginning on page 353. So it's see neoplasm, comma, by site, comma, malignant. So this is stage 4 lung cancer. So the location is the lung in the neoplasm table. So neoplasm, drop down lung, would take me to page 358. So lung is on the right column of page 358. Again, this is only if you have an AAPC 2018 ICD-10 book, where these page numbers be specific for you. Now with the lung, we do have drop downs available. Isogos lobe, carina, halus, lingula, and so forth. Unfortunately, though, all we have in our documentation is just stage 4 lung cancer. So I've used the word cancer because of cancer, comma, see neoplasm table. And I'm at the lung, so I'm going to cross out lung, but nowhere does it give me specific documentation as to where in the lung this neoplasm is. So unfortunately, I do have to use the standard lung code. I would not be able to do in the drop down for specific locations. And then because this is stage 4, and we're not coding for the pathologist report, and there's not a metastasis or spreading of the cancer listed, we know it's stage 4 cancer, so that'd be a primary malignancy then. Again, it's a primary malignancy because we only have it in one location and we're not coding the pathologist report. So then when we do not have a pathologist report available to code it carcinoma in situ or COT in situ, then we have to code it primary malignancy. Now looking at the neoplasm table, it does say let me get a little computer there. There we go. C 34.9 hyphen. Although, remember with the hyphen in the neoplasm table, that's just telling us we need to go back to finish more characters off. Because C34.9 hyphen, that's not a code. The hyphen tells us we need more than the 4 characters that we have. So now I'm going back in the back part of the book, and looking up to code C34.9 to see what else is going on. Takes me to page 475. And I have C34.9. I have C34.90 of unspecified bronchus or lung, 0.91 for right bronchus or lung, or 0.92 for left bronchus or lung. So based on the documentation specifically, now even though in this case, we need to know the laterality, and even though if we're able to look up the diagnosis code location in the book, we are able to sometimes look at the procedure performed to see what, in this case, what was done, the left lung or the right lung. Even though if the procedure section tells us which lung the procedure was performed on, left or the right side, we still have to have the diagnosis code show the left or the right side as well. So meaning, let's say, for example, if this was done on the right side, on the procedure, even though, yes, most likely the doctor did the procedure on the right side because the malignancy is on the right lobe, or maybe on both. Whichever the procedure was done, the doctor still needs to list in the diagnosis section which one it is, left or the right. So in this case, in the diagnosis code, we do not know specifically it's left or right because we just have the phrase stage 4 lung cancer. That would give us C34.90 as a diagnosis code, since we're not going to guess or assume on anything on which lobe or bronchus this was performed in. So we have the diagnosis codes, J90 and C34.90. Now then the procedure. Procedure performed, we have right video-assisted thoracoscopy, license of adhesions, pleurosis. So in this case, if we try to look up the word thoracoscopy first, in the back of the CPT book, if you try to look up thoracoscopy, Thoracoscopy, see, we have thoracoscopy. Starts on the top left part of page 1017. And then with that, we have the drop downs of diagnostic or surgical. And since we have the procedure performed, we know that we're doing some types of procedures here because license of adhesions, tuck, pleurostodesis. So I'm going to cross out the word thoracoscopy because we're using that. And then again, we know that we're doing some type of surgical procedure. So then jumping down, we have with this, with that, on the long list. And we can look at the drop downs for the with and all the different options that we have. There's nothing about license of adhesions. However, though, we can drop down to with pleurodesis, about a little more than midway through the surgical list. So we have thoracoscopy, drop down surgical, then about a little bit more than halfway down with pleurodesis. And then we have 32650. And even though it's not a range, it's just one code itself, we still want to actually double check and make sure that that was the procedure that we actually did. So looking at the code 32650, the code 32650 takes me to the bottom right part of page 193 in the CPT book. And it says thoracoscopy, but I can also cross out the term video assisted as far as using those words, because scrolling back to where the section begins on the left column above 32601, we have thoracoscopy in parentheses, video assisted thoracic surgery. So there confirms the terms video assisted. And then going back to that code though, the 32650, thoracoscopy surgical with pleurodesis, such as mechanical or chemical, but I can cross out the word pleurodesis there. So just because we had the one code in the back, 32650, and that was it, no ranges, that does validate our code for this procedure, and the CPT code as being, doing the strikeout, don't want to do that anymore. The 32650. And even though we did not use the word right in this case, or the license of adhesions, or the word talc, we still have only the one code that we can choose from, because when we looked at the thoracoscopy drop-down surgical, there were no codes that we could use as to add in the lysis of adhesions. But so in this case, though, we do have the thoracoscopy and the pleurodesis. That would have us just be the one CPT code, 32650. So in this case, with the procedure performed, the right video-assisted thoracoscopy, lysis of adhesions, talic pleurodesis, that would give us the CPT code, 32650. No modifiers are needed. And the post-op diagnosis of recurrent pleural effusion with stage 4 lung cancer, that would give us J90 for our primary diagnosis code, and our secondary diagnosis code as C34.90.
Thank you for taking your time out to watch that op report dissection on the respiratory system. And hopefully that during that entire time, we all kept cool, calm, and collective. We had a nice breathing, we're doing good on that. And yes, that is my bad dad joke in there for respiratory system, and that's all I got. So if you liked this episode, then stay tuned for our next one, where we'll be looking at the op report dissection for the cardiovascular system. But for today, I'm Paul Chandler, and thank you for watching the Paul Chandler Show, and have an awesome rest of your night.